Okay, the time is 5 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So we do have a workshop this evening, so appreciate Planning and Zoning Department. I know this is the culmination of almost years, if we could say, months for sure, and pretty close to years of work that they've been putting in with the comp plan that was recently approved and now moving into some code updates. So appreciate hearing from them tonight. As you're all aware, there was an open house that was held last week. That was to get public input, feedback in regards to the proposed amendments to code and changes. And so that is what staff will be presenting tonight, is those code amendments, also the feedback that was received from the public. And then staff is here for your questions as well as we go through this, and your suggestions. As we hope to bring this back on the 21st. Again, that'll depend on tonight. If we feel we need more time, we can obviously do that and take more time to bring it back for further discussion. But staff is also available after tonight if there are one-on-one conversations that need to happen, and if you want to get into greater detail on different items, that they are available for that. This is a legislative matter, so there's not concern about ex parte communication, as it does affect the entire city. So you're more than welcome to meet with them as well. And then I also want to thank all of your staff. I know Joe is here, and I saw some others, so I know that you've been working tirelessly on this as well. It probably feels like your entire career here at the City of Caldwell is right here wrapped up in this baby. So appreciate all the work and effort on that, and look forward to hearing from all of you on that, and then also for questions. And then I'll leave it to you, if you don't mind kind of addressing how you would like to proceed tonight in regards to getting questions from council, things of that nature, and as we move forward. And again, this is meant for discussion between staff and council. That's why we had the public input last week in regards to that. So this is kind of discussion between staff and the city council this evening, and getting your feedback in that regards. So Robin, I'll turn it over to you, and you can direct us how you'd like to go from here.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Robin Collins, Community Development Director for the City of Caldwell. Joe and I are going to kind of tag team this. I'm going to get us kicked off, and then he's going to go through some of these amendments, and then I'll probably jump through 3/4 of the way in. As we go through them, we're happy to answer any questions as we're going through them, keeping in mind that we only do have an hour, so we want to try to get through this stuff. We are presenting at a very high level, because there is a lot of changes in the code, but we are hitting the major high points and the major updates that are more impactful in the code. Some of them are just administrative changes and processes. So I'll go ahead and take us through just some background. We had our first city council workshop back in February of 2024. That's when we kind of went through that these amendments were coming, how we were going to organize them into packages, and we briefly talked a little bit about the landscaping and the multifamily development code. In April of 2024, we had a stakeholder meeting with developers, planning consultants, contractors. We sat down with them, gave a presentation, took one-on-one feedback, had a lot of good feedback from the development community. Then in November of 2024, we had another city council workshop where our planner, Joe Dodson, presented primarily the landscaping ordinance and the multifamily development ordinance. Again, as we know, those are two of the most critical ones moving forward. And then we had a P&Z Commission workshop in February of 2025. And then we had a community open house that the mayor talked about in March, and then our P&Z Commission public hearing. We had about 20 to 23 people show up for the open house. It wasn't as well attended as expected from the community. We had a couple people that felt like it was really confusing for them, but the majority of the people that showed up felt like it was good information. They appreciated that we did kind of a one-on-one with them and walked them through things individually. So again, high level, we are touching a lot of articles in the code. Why is it so big? Because with the reorganization of the code, like we had talked about, we're trying to reorganize it in a way where everything that has to do with residential districts is in one chapter. Same with commercial, industrial. So to do that, we have to open up a lot of articles and touch all of them, because they all have to move at the same time. Otherwise, we can't do them. So we're going to go, I think the only article in our zoning ordinance that we're not touching is Article 4. Everything else, we are opening them up for some changes. So again, the main purpose of this is we're cleaning up some of the language for clarity. There's a lot, there were processes in the code that have not been done for I don't know how many years. They were very old, outdated. Fixing those, we're relocating sections to other areas of the code so we can reformat it. We're defining the current policies and processes, adding definitions that were needed to explain code provisions, and then obviously updating the code, the land use tables and whatnot, for the new comprehensive plan, but also for land uses that should have never been in certain zoning districts, and so we're cleaning those up as well. You want to take it from here, Joe? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Joe and let him go through some of this with you, and I'm going to run the ordinances in the background in case we need to pull them up.
Thank you, Robin. Mayor, Council, for the record, Joe Dodson, Principal Planner here now, Planner 4. Thank you, Robin. And Council, really, Mayor, for signing that piece of paper. Appreciate it. Like Robin said, we're going to keep going through these high level. If you have questions throughout, please feel free to ask. We do actually want your input. Otherwise, we do this in a little bit of a vacuum, so we want your guys' perspectives on this. First thing we'll talk about a little bit is the sign code. Updated it. We went through, especially Robin, went through a lot of the case law that's been out on these, and we changed a lot of our sign code to ensure that we're very content neutral. We want to make sure we don't get sued. This is something that comes up throughout the country. There's a lot of planning case law on sign code and being content neutral. So we wanted to update our sign code and make sure that we're good. We also are prohibiting freestanding pole signs, which, as you can see, the ones on the left is those ugly poles, just a singular pole with a block on top. And typically you see those as like freeway signs or gas station signs or things like that. So we're prohibiting those and requiring that they have a monument, that they be more of a monument. And part of that is allowing just the billboards, which now are replacing the off-premises signs, because that is part of this whole content neutral thing. You can't dictate what's on the signs, so now we're just lumping them in together as billboards, and they're only permitted within 500 feet of the interstate. Any questions on the sign code? There's other changes in there.
I really like this, but curious, is everybody up to this point grandfathered in then, or do they have to go back and change their signs?
No, no, of course, yeah. Anybody that's got their, even their permit in by now, they'll be grandfathered in with the
Okay.
current regulations, yes.
Thank you.
Next one is landscaping. These are some highlighted points, like 25% or 1,000 square feet being a trigger for being, now you have to comply with the new code. If you're less than 2 acres, we wanted to provide an opportunity for those smaller projects, smaller developers, even individual homeowners or commercial builders. You don't need a landscape architect in order to do your plans. That can be a pretty high expense for people that are just required to do like 3 trees and some shrubs. Like there's no reason to add that expensive of that to them. So we're trying to change that. Requiring 75% of the trees and shrubs to be rated as low or moderate water. Again, trying to just think ahead to water usage in general. We may be good now, but let's not exacerbate any issues in the future. Part of that is also changing the requirement. Current code for grass is 70% minimum, pushing that to 20% minimum, but 50% maximum. It also allows for a little bit more diversity of shrubs and trees and walls and berms and other elements within the landscape buffers, and also reduce the amount of watering that's required. Requiring the open space to be constructed within the first 2 phases of development. That's in response to a lot of issues that we've ran into over the years of multi-phase developments, that they just happen to have their main open space in the phases 9 and 10. And that's not fair to the residents that are already there and occupying it, not to mention sometimes things happen economically and they may not get to those later phases. So we wanted to make sure that those main open space and amenities are built towards the front end of the development. Also increase open space for PUDs from 10% to 15%. That's after feedback again from council as well as residents of wanting those PUDs. If we're going to give things with the PUD like deviations to dimensional standards, we should be getting something back that's greater than just the baseline 10% open space. Also requiring all open space to be connected with 5-foot micropaths or neighborhood pathways, however you want to call them. And that's something that typically projects will include, but it was not in code, so we just wanted to make it very clear that that's going to be a requirement. Also landscaping, we increased the required landscape buffers for streets. Across the board, it was about a 5-foot increase in general. And again, that's to pull some of those homes away from the busy roadways. Require additional landscape amenities along the key gateways and corridors. The comp plan calls out a lot of key gateways and corridors. That is also in a new overlay district or district that outlines where those key corridors are and what those additional landscape amenities and buffer requirements are going to be. One thing that's simple but effective is requiring both evergreen and deciduous trees within the land use buffers. Current code does not differentiate that. That's so that in the winter you actually have some land use buffer still with evergreens versus if you have all deciduous trees, you just have sticks and you're not really getting any coverage and buffer there. So we're trying to just accommodate that. Also increase buffers where there's adjacent residential uses, and that's for a lot of non-residential uses as well as multifamily to single family, as we've discussed multiple times. But there's other slides that discuss what the increased buffer is for like industrial to residential. New requirements for landscaping around buildings that have elevations that face a street. So current code doesn't have anything. You can just do building, sidewalk, parking, and then you have your street buffer. This new code requires there's at least a little bit of a strip of landscaping around the building to help just beautify that when it's facing a public roadway. Same thing with the requirement for landscaping around the perimeter parking lots. There's unfortunately some developments that just have a lot of parking between sites that's just parking and then asphalt stops and then another parking where new asphalt, and it just gets really ugly and complicated between the parcels. So we're proposing to have a minimum 5-foot buffer between them to have a nice delineation of each site and each parking area. It helps beautify them and also helps reduce heat gain by requiring additional trees around the buffers, and overall just better for the city. Also proposing new standards to allow for water-wise and drought-tolerant landscaping in specific instances. So this would be limited. There's specific criteria in the code, but where that would be, not typically going to be permitted in a street buffer, not going to be typically permitted in a land use buffer either, but more of those, I'd say, industrial areas where you have industrial adjacent to industrial adjacent to industrial, and yes, they need to have that 5-foot buffer of landscaping, but requiring grass in an area where they may not have irrigation is a waste, and they're going to ask not to do it anyway, so we're providing opportunities to use some drought-tolerant landscaping there. Another big change and section, this is 100205 just for reference, is off-street parking. Current table has a lot of differing land uses. If you guys ever look at that section, it can be complicated, and those land uses don't match what's in the land use schedule, so then you have to kind of jump back and forth and guess where they might land. So tried to simplify that by just having a general requirement for non-residential uses being 1 per 500 and all industrial being 1 per 2,000. These are pretty industry standard. They'll typically, most developers for commercial, especially like a big box, will do more than the minimum required. And that's, again, just leaning into letting the market decide what that may be. Other change there would be multifamily. That's now required based on the number of bedrooms versus just a flat rate of per unit. We did the math on a multiple projects. The next slide does it too, but I'll talk to that a little bit more in a second. Also, part of that added the requirement of 1 guest parking space per 10 units, so 10% essentially guest parking. This is just an example, existing code on the left, proposed code on the right, and what those parking requirements would be. Same project, same number of units, but the spread of the 1, 2, and 3 bedroom changes. Or I should say studio, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedroom. As you can see, current parking, 1.5 per unit, period, no requirement for guest parking, 105 spaces. New code would be 132, that's 25% more parking as the baseline requirement. So that's in response to what council has asked to ensure that we have these things parked appropriately. And we minimize some of that spillage that can happen onto a nearby local street, for an example. Is there any comments or questions on the parking or landscaping before I go on?
Looks good.
Okay. After the commission hearing, we have made a number of changes, but right now we wanted to call out that there was a recent legislative bill that passed that removed the requirement or allowance for cities to require any electrical vehicle parking. So we're striking that from the code altogether. We had made changes to change the percentage and frankly reduce what the overall requirement would have been, but now we're just striking that entire section to comply with state code. Moving into Article 3, as more of our administrative procedures, included changes and updates to the design review process, as well as the, where they're applicable, which would be the overlay zones and then all of downtown versus just the city center. And also outline whether that's going to be administrative or a commission level and things like that. The most important piece of Article 3, I would say, is probably the density bonus program. That's very new. That's something that was outlined in the comprehensive plan. The little cheat sheet that I got printed out for you guys discusses the applicability, where it says it's applicable to developments containing residential uses, as outlined in the comp plan and the zoning ordinance, except for those properties zoned R1 or developments located within the neighborhood 1 place type, which doesn't get density bonus, but they can do that conservation area development. This also, we recently heard some feedback about the term that we're using in multiple sections of the table, but also just in the purpose statements, including a diversity of housing. Purpose of that is to include options for housing choice, whether somebody wants the estate lots or somebody wants a patio home on 2,000 square foot lot that doesn't need or want the maintenance of a lawn, things like that. It's diversity simply meaning variety. That's all we're trying to say there. And so we just want to make that very clear. We went and changed that in the purpose statement of this section just to ensure that there's no confusion, as well as using different language throughout this section. Overall, the density bonus program, we proposed it as a point system. So doing one thing, typically, unless you're in the 4-point category on the right side, you do not get that full density bonus. It's not like the PUD code of current code and the old comp plan where you submit a PUD and you can automatically get a basically double density bonus. That will no longer be the case with this program. And to just reiterate, you no longer, through the PUD code, would be permitted to have any density increase through the PUD code. It's only through this density bonus program. We proposed a half point, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each one is 25%. Half a point is obviously not, but we said roughly 10% for that. There's different criteria, different, I guess, intents on that. There's some of them where I would anticipate if you're going to get the full density bonus, most 80% at a minimum of your residential rental units would be deed restricted to some different levels of affordability. That would be for the purpose of having a mix of incomes within a development. There's also the option of, if you want to do the for sale units, you can do deed restricting them at 120% of the AMI or less, which is your annual area median income. I apologize. There's a lot of acronyms in our world, but area median income. There's also proposal for universal design, which would be potentially age in place or ADA units, requiring like light switches to be a certain height, countertops to be adjustable to be certain heights, grab bars in the bathrooms, those types of things. And this is, again, to provide housing choice for people who need these types of homes, and where we see that, and we're trying to help accommodate that if they want to. Again, this is a voluntary program. In no way is this required for anybody to ask for or do. This is all if they want X amount of density, these are some of the options that we're going to request. Other ones are additional qualified open space, multiple housing types, dedication of land for the city, for parks and or for a school, public facilities like fire, police, those types of things. Those are typical in any type of incentive-based program that the city provides additional density in lieu of having that 5-acre parcel for a joint police fire station type of facility. Is there any specific questions on the density bonus program? Because it is complicated, it's new, understandable.
Councilor Register?
So is that the whole presentation that we're getting on density bonus tonight?
Essentially, but I can go into more detail if you would like. Thankfully, this section of code is not entirely too long, so.
Actually, I think I have a question for Robin then. Because when we met, we talked a little bit about density bonus, and we talked about how other counselors had concerns about it, so it wasn't coming, but now it's back. And so I'm trying to figure out how it came back.
Mayor and Council Register, it's my understanding the density bonus was always coming forward what we agreed to was that we would not allow density bonuses for R1. And we have it prohibited that in the R1 zone.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Dintber?
Okay, I've got a lot of questions about the bonus density, right?
Yes, sir.
So let's just get them out on the table so
Let's
you
go.
know where they're all coming from right away.
Yes, sir.
So if I'm gonna use, figuratively speaking, there must be some sort of lot minimum, development minimum. I wouldn't be able to come in with a 2-acre parcel of property and, let's say, donate to the police department, 1/16 of an acre, and then be allowed to build 24 units on the property, correct?
Correct. There's not a specific, you have to be 5 acres minimum to do it, but logic says that that's not gonna fly. That the city would not accept it, and that's one of the parameters for the donation of land, is the city needs to be willing to accept that land for that use, whatever it may be, a police station, community center, et cetera.
And so there would need to be some sort of coordination in advance, if I'm correct, that the police department or somebody would say, yes, this would be an ideal location for a substation or the fire department. So just thinking about what we have in the hopper, how many of those developments would say, oh, I'm gonna take advantage of the density program because I want to donate a police department?
There's a few I can think of, but that's a thing that happens, yes, sir.
Okay. So the other question about the density, when we talk about affordable housing units, I think that's a confusing term in many cases, because I live in affordable housing. It's the house I can afford. And everybody here lives in affordable housing. They live in the house that they can afford.
Sure.
So if we're talking about affordable housing and a diverse housing stock, meaning housing on 3,000-foot lots, 5,000-foot lot, cottage houses, whatever, we would not be determining the level of affordability. That would be the developer determining the level of affordability. Is that correct?
Mayor, Counselor, that is correct on all of what's in the density bonus program except for the actual affordable units, which is defined as affordability based on the Department of HUD, Housing and Urban. I cannot remember the acronym right now. I'm
Housing
having
and
a day.
urban development, right, okay.
Yes.
And so they have affordability standards. But that would be something they would voluntarily comply with
Absolutely.
on home ownership? Or is there a possibility for them to claim a density bonus for multifamily also?
It would also apply to rental units, whether that's multifamily or whatever it may be, yes. But they would have to deed restrict those, et cetera, provide proof that they have that funding. There's a lot of steps, right? And some of those happen way outside of the city's jurisdiction. But we would then take that proof and say, okay, you're meeting that criteria that we've outlined here, and we'll allow that additional density bump. And that's typically, there's usually 2 ways that developers do deed restricted housing, right? It's either they get more units or the city donates the land. Those are the 2 most common. City donating land is hard to do. It's hard to come by for us to have land to give away. So the other avenue, in order to help us receive some of these additional units that are quote-unquote affordable, yes, but in this case we mean deed restricted affordable for specific subsets of the demographic that the comp plan has already outlined that we need within the existing conditions report. If you comply with that, then yes, you can get those additional units, and therefore then it pencils out, and now we have those units that we otherwise would not have had for people who need that choice in getting a unit.
Okay, so let's talk about additional open space and multi-use or that sort of stuff. So if you do, we're gonna make 5 acres or 2 acres of green space. Would that be managed by the development through HOA? Or as we've seen in the past, somebody comes and say, well, I'll just donate it to you because we want the city to run it. How do you anticipate the management of that open space happening?
typically it's gonna be the developer. It would be additional open space that they're proposing within their subdivision for that line. There's the line where it talks about actually dedicating land, and if you're actually gonna dedicate it to the city for like a public city park, there's a different level of requirement to obtain that, again, coordination with the city, with the Parks Department, with planning and zoning, et cetera. Versus saying, oh yeah, the open space requirement for our project is 2 acres, but we're providing 4. That's different. That would anticipate the HOA taking care of that.
Is there anything that you can think of or that we should be thinking of if I decide that I'm going to go for the density bonus because I'm offering 3 acres of open space? And then 5 years down the road, the open space is full of weeds and not managed, and you know what would be better there is 16 units of multifamily.
That is a good question. With any of these, I would say that's, I mean, possibility of that happening with any program or any vacant piece of land that we have in general, including the open space in any subdivision that we currently have. Theoretically, they could try to subdivide that if they provided some open space somewhere else. I think within these developments, especially if they are part of an annexation, then we're gonna have the development agreement opportunity to ensure that that's not something that can be so easily obtained. They can't just come in and be like, well, it's zoned R2 now, so I can turn around and re-subdivide this in 5 years when everybody forgets about it. There's gonna be other requirements that will come before this body, and you guys, staff also, would be able to be like, oh, no, this is not, they already received an extra 16 units because of the bonus program. We would recommend that you deny this request to further subdivide this property. This open space is already designated for use of the residents. So there are avenues within our processes that would help alleviate any potential of that happening.
Okay. So we've heard about deed restricted properties in conversation in the past with regards to Wittenberger Park and the other park over in the, is there any reason why a property subject to open space in conjunction with a density bonus could be deed restricted?
You mean both, you're saying? Oh, yes, absolutely. They can use multiple boxes within the density bonus program, multiple avenues to get to whatever they think that they want. Now, part of that is also, it's gonna be part of some development application. And if city council determines through that application, hey, we don't agree with your request that this equals 2 units per acre additional, or whatever it may be, we'll approve your project, but only with half of the density bonus, or something like that. Council will absolutely have that purview through those development applications. None of it is guaranteed at all, as any public hearing is, right? It's discretionary.
That's it for now. Thank you.
Okay.
Excellent.
One more question.
Council Register?
Sorry, so, because I'm trying to understand the bonus density thing completely, but are we collecting impact fees on the bonus or just on the base?
It would, when we collect impact fees, it will be per unit, period. So, yes, it would be on the additional units as well.
Okay, thanks.
Because we collect them only at the building permit phase, not on the development submittal phase.
Good. Any other questions? Yes,
Yeah,
Councilor
Mr.
Sharp?
Mayor, Joe, do you think there's a snowball chance of hell ever getting schools on impact fees to the legislature?
I have a lot of very personal feelings on that. I hope someday we do, yes, but that's well above my
What do you
probable
think it would
understanding.
take, just we talking to the legislators, or what do you think it would take to solve that problem? I've got a meeting with a couple of them tomorrow, is the reason I asked.
No. We can have that discussion offline if you would like. I do want to make sure we get through this, but more conversations from constituents as well as elected officials is going to be a big help.
Because like I
Absolutely.
say, when you look at all the bonding that's taken place and the higher taxes we have because we don't collect,
Impact
it's
fees.
becoming a major problem, and with our growth, it just doubles the problem, so,
I understand.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Joe at this time in regards to that? So,
All right.
okay.
Keep going. On to, well, we skipped Article 4, like we said, the one thing we didn't touch. Didn't need to touch that domino, thankfully. This is where a lot of the dominoes moved and had to move in order for this to happen. So we took all the different requirements for residential, commercial, manufacturing, et cetera, and put them into their individual articles, because right now they're kind of spread all over the place and it's hard to track where they are. So Article 5 is now gonna be residential, Article 6 commercial, et cetera. And that way, anybody who wants to do a residential project, they know, okay, I'm gonna start here. Residential districts, Article 5, that's gonna have your land use schedule, your dimensional standards, and any other random criteria in there. The same thing with all the other ones. So through that, there were some common amendments that we had to do through all those articles. We created new land use tables specific to the districts. We updated the dimensional standards, created those density tables that were pulled from the comp plan, put those in there, including the prohibition that R1 cannot be part of that. Consolidated some land uses into main categories, example, like personal services and retail sales. If you look at our current code, there's a lot of individual personal services or specific retail sales. That's like, well, that's just retail sales. And the use of an ice cream shop versus some other restaurant type use is gonna be very same. And so what we decided is that the size of those facilities, the size of those properties are what we're going to regulate, not so much the individual uses in them. We also changed the way that we measure the height of the buildings. Current code is some weird calculation of midpoint of all of your roofing things, and it varies with each permit almost, and so you have to make sure it's there. So we're just changing that to say finished grade to the peak and be done, to help make sure that we grandfather in existing permits and make sure we don't make a bunch of homes legal non-conforming. We went and increased the maximum height in R1 and R2. I think that's just those two districts by 5 feet to help just accommodate that additional change from where we're measuring it. So we're not really increasing the height, it's just changing where we measure it and accommodating for that. Other major changes we made, storage units being only permitted in industrial zones and by special use permit at the council level. Special use permit council level might be something new that you guys have not seen. Technically, it was already in our code, it just wasn't in the land use schedule for many instances. We've utilized that a lot more with some of these changes throughout these articles. One of that would be multifamily. Current code is about 7 or more, I believe, units for multifamily. Now it's gonna go and coincide with the building code, which is 3 or more units, is now gonna be multifamily. And then they have to comply with the multifamily development code, which has more strict criteria for development. We also split townhomes into 2 categories, being 3 or less, or 4 or more, to better regulate that mass and scale, right? Because a 3 units attached looks a lot different than 5 or 6 or 8 units attached. We don't get many 8plexes in that way, but that's theoretically possible when you have a townhome. Also proposing an allowance for accessory dwelling units to be for all single-family homes. Currently, you have to do a special use permit to have it in the R1. Multiple planning organizations, our National Planning Association, as well as even the historic districts, are proposing that you make it easier to allow accessory dwelling units to help have people the affordability of different options to either move from their main house to their ADU and let their kids have their house, or have their kids stay in their ADU, or whatever it may be. So we wanted to just alleviate some of those hindrances for residents, because I will tell you that's one of the biggest things that people have come to the counter for in the 1.5 years that I've been here, have been residents asking, why do I have to go through a public hearing in order to just put a 500 square foot accessory unit on my property? Why do I have to do that? I don't want to spend the money to pay somebody to do this. I don't want to spend the money to draw the plans. I don't want to, all those additional expenses for a singular homeowner. So we heard those comments and complaints and are proposing that to be just permitted by right for all single family homes, regardless of the zoning district. It's just for the single family home. Also proposing reducing lot sizes for R2 and R3, no reduction in the R1. This is to reflect the different uses that are permitted in those zones, and to help differentiate between the zones, because in current code, there's not a lot of difference between R1, R2, and R3. They're very similar with the lot sizes, so this is to actually create zoning that matches different lot sizes and the different types of residential uses you would want within those zones. We also are allowing more commercial uses within the commercial uses within the industrial zones and residential zones for that matter. This is also part of the comp plan, and where that was having a mix of uses in different categories to provide support for, in this case, industrial zones. You want some commercial uses nearer than what our current code and comp plan allow to help support those employment centers, to help support those employees of those businesses. And then, similar to what I mentioned with multifamily changing, requiring that if you have 7 or more units on a property / in a building, then you have to do the council level at SUP, and that is considered large-scale apartments.
Joe?
Yes, sir.
Mayor, may I? Referring to the ADUs, I'm in general in agreement with this, especially because of the housing crisis and housing need and how we can do this. There's a couple of questions and then a clarification. Morgan, I'm glad you're here. First of all, this would depend upon the lot size, no doubt, and what we could permit in there. It's just not wide open. Is that fair to say?
I would say yes, because obviously your lot size is going to dictate your setbacks. So yes, if you have a smaller lot, you're going to have a smaller ADU if you want one.
Okay, and then would we expect it to conform to what that neighborhood supports? I mean, we don't want to see ADUs that are completely out of place in
In whatever neighborhood they're in.
Right, right.
Absolutely, yes. There's specific criteria in there that said it has to match the home.
Right,
Essentially, it doesn't have to be exact replica, right? But it needs to complement the home. It can't be a bright red ADU and your home is some neutral colors. It needs to conform.
And then, and finally, Morgan, there was extensive conversations with the Historic Preservation Commission about this. And I think one of the best arguments I heard back when I was with that group that works so hard and is so enthused about their assignment, parking could be a real problem in that historic district where the streets are narrow and you're adding a car, and this is wide open to that now included, or would it still require an SUP and it would still need to go through the Historic Preservation District to get approved like other units would?
Yeah. Well,
Sorry, yes, this doesn't change anything with historic preservation, so they would still be required to go through a C of A, which they've always been required to do.
Okay. Thank you. That was what I wanted to be clear on.
thank you. Oh, great questions. Other major changes that we had, provisions for requiring commercial fronting major arterials when there is a mixed-use project. So mixed use meaning, in this case, like vertically integrated, we have commercial on the first floor, residential above, or if it's not that way, we still want the commercial fronting the major roadways, typically. Obviously, sometimes zoning and things like that will change that. This is one of the setbacks that we had mentioned earlier, a 40-foot setback required from industrial located to residential. Current code has, through the land use buffers, I think the maximum is 25 foot, so this is a 15-foot increase there. Also proposing all industrial land use to be enclosed within a building within 500 feet of a residential district or structure. That's a major change as well, and that's again to limit some of where we have these residential structures stuck in these M1 zones, for example, or people are proposing, we have M1 next to R1 or traditional neighborhood or something. We don't want those exterior, external industrial uses so close to them. If you put it in a building, a little better, a little more buffering naturally by that. Also, per the comp plan and what we're doing here, allowing commercial uses within residential zones at major intersections. So major roadway, arterial to arterial intersections, some arterial and collector intersections, but only at those major intersections. And there's specific footnotes within the land use schedule tables that you'll see. If you look through those residential districts and you're like, wow, why is that permitted there? It's only permitted at that major intersection. Also requiring design review for all of downtown and not just city center, as I mentioned. And then improving the downtown framework master plan and design guidelines. Basically taking that old framework master plan that I understand was done but then never codified, and taking that and bringing that into the code so that way we have a lot more design standards within our entire downtown core. Part of that is having the vacant lots in downtown city center to be landscaped if unutilized for 180 days. If they're just sitting vacant, then you need to do something with them to help beautify the area. Prohibiting chain link fencing in downtown except for construction sites seems like a no-brainer, but again, just adding that in code to make sure that it's understood that that's the requirement. Also change the parking standards for downtown to require full compliance for residential uses and multifamily. So current code allows you to count parking within certain area, within a certain radius. New code proposes that if you're going to do multifamily, you have to provide for that all on site, period. Also removed the allowances for allowing gas stations, car washes, warehouses, auto uses within downtown and the traditional neighborhood. Again, that's to help try to change the character of these downtown areas and not allow so many auto-oriented uses. And then with the overlay districts, I will hand this back over to Robin so we can squeeze through the end here.
So within the code, currently, we have the airport overlay district that you're probably familiar with. And then we had the historic, the Studenberg overlay district. That's pretty much the only overlay districts we had within our code. So we have created a few more overlay districts, just to explain what those are. An overlay district is another layer on top of your base zoning district. So when you come in, you have to comply with your base zoning district. Then you go to the overlay, and there's typically more stringent or more specific requirements that you have to do in addition to that base zoning district. So the major changes we did was in the airport impact overlay district, we added some additional land uses like hotels and motels for transient residential. We did add some commercial uses. These were all coordinated through the airport, and we got Scott's sign off on all of these uses that we put in there. And then we created a historic overlay district, so we only had the Studenberg, so we titled it Historic Overlay because we recognize that we have other historic districts in our community that we want to recognize. So we added the North Caldwell Historic District to the list. It's been on the books for a lot of years. It kind of got forgotten about, so we want to put it back in there. This will give us the opportunity in the future now in that overlay to maybe get together a task force or a committee or something to come up with some standards or design requirements for that area. So we don't have any currently in there, design criteria yet. It's a placeholder so that we can have more conversations. We created what's called scenic overlay districts. So this is where, as Joe mentioned in the comp plan, it designated key gateways and corridors. And I think we've talked about that in the past, about having some requirements for our key gateways and main corridors coming into our city to look a little bit better as you're entering Caldwell. So we've now created a scenic overlay area within our code. It has some criteria in there right now that was recommended from the comp plan, but we'll continue to explore additional requirements based on council's feedback. Some of those things it'll include is design criteria for building placement, landscaping, architectural design of the building, signs. The other overlay we added is we always had the Indian Creek overlay, but our code mentioned the Boise River corridor, but it really didn't have any guidance for it. So now we've added in the Boise River corridor and added the same pathway requirements as we have for like Indian Creek so that we can start building on our green belt along the Boise River. This is probably the biggest one that's going to be a change. It's called the Special Development and Urban Design Overlay. This includes downtown. So we've just moved all the requirements that were already in the code for downtown into this area. We've included the traditional neighborhood area that we will start building on some design criteria for that as we move forward as well, and kind of coordinate that with the North Caldwell Historic area. And then there's an area between the river and Centennial and the river and Simplot where we made sure in the comp plan that that's more of a mixed use. We didn't want industrial along our Boise River. And so what we're saying now is if you're located in that area, even if the base zoning district, if you're M1 and the base zoning says you're industrial, there are certain uses that you will not be able to do. However, there's a footnote in there. If you're an existing industrial business and you have one, you can continue to do business. You could even expand, but you might be subject to some beautification efforts. And we're talking things like making sure that you've got screening for like outdoor storage and some additional landscaping to buffer those existing industrial uses. And so we'll work with those businesses to come up with a plan for that. And again, we have some additional prohibitions on land use within these overlays. As Joe mentioned, especially in the traditional neighborhood, we've seen a lot of auto repair, outdoor storage, a whole bunch of things that people wanted to do. And we really want to clean up that neighborhood. That neighborhood has been a little bit forgotten about over the years. And we've had a lot of people in that neighborhood come to us and really cry out that they want the city to kind of help get that cleaned up. So the first step is to do that through our land use tables. Any questions on the overlays? The other overlays that are in there are simple. It's like your floodplain, you know, your typical ones that were already in the code. We just put them into one section.
Counselor Denberg?
So I have a question about the overlays. So the boundaries of an overlay could be flexible, it's built out, we don't need the overlay here, or we've done some reconsideration, we wouldn't have to change the zoning ordinance, we just change the overlay boundary?
So Mayor and Councilman Denberg, great question. Yes, so currently in the overlay, we have kind of a map that's in there. If we see that we need to, make it more narrow or we want to expand it, it would just be going back and changing that map in the ordinance.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you. I'll finish this out in the next 15 minutes, 14. Next article is Article 12. That was, I believe, the current downtown section that moved to Article 11. And this provided opportunity for us to use specific use provisions, which is another layer of requirements. It's not necessarily saying the uses are prohibited or not prohibited or anything like that, but it's saying that if you have these uses, adult businesses, flex spaces, mixed use, mobile food unit parks, etc., you have additional requirements. And the point of that is some of this was already in the code. It was in the downtown section, a lot of it. Other ones are new uses. And we wanted to take that opportunity to say, sure, you're permitted to do a mobile food unit park in these zones, but what are the criteria? What do you have to do? Do you have to do a street buffer? Do you have to have a picnic table? Do you have to have any shade structure? How many are allowed as a quote-unquote park? Those are the types of provisions that are located and expressed in these sections. Any questions on the specific use provisions? It's a large article. We actually moved some things like accessory use standards are in that section now. Wireless communication facilities. I brushed over a lot of pages technically, so if you have questions on that, please feel free. Okay. Next article is the planned unit development. Touched on this a little bit, but these are the highlights of those changes. We deleted the ability to have prohibited uses as part of the PUD. The current code says 30% specially or non-permitted uses, that we took out the non-permitted part and just saying that you could have the 30% of special use permitted uses as part of the PUD without having to do a separate special use permit. That's really all that's saying. Also requiring 3 or more housing types instead of just 2, again, similar to the open space requirement, requiring more out of the development in order to get what they're asking for. Also cannot reduce the required number of amenities. The developers are using the PUD code to amend the PUD code, just making it very clear you can't do that. Also, if they're requesting deviations from setbacks, that they have to provide additional amenities above and beyond the code. Requests for deviations cannot be to increase the density except for infill properties. And this is part of like an infill development code where you have our infill has now been changed from 20 acres to 5 acres because frankly, if you have 20 acres, you should be able to comply with your zoning standards. There's not that reasoning of saying, oh, I can't make it work anymore is no longer applicable. But 5 acres or less, it's a little different, right? You have usually a little bit more constraints. And again, reiterate, the density allowances that are in current code were because of the old comp plan, which are now no longer applicable. Next one is multifamily. We've discussed this. I think this is the 4th or 5th time I've presented it to you guys. So main highlights, created minimum site design standards, minimum building design standards, as well as changing the buffer requirements, or including buffer requirements. Increase the setbacks when it's adjacent to other residential uses, requiring a minimum 10% overall, but also in some instances, if you have a project over 5 acres or 50 units, then you have to have the 10% base plus a per unit, and that is to scale the open space. This was something that developers had asked about last year, and then what engineers asked at the workshop. What does that mean? Why is it per unit in addition? It's saying that On a 50-acre site, you could have the same number of units theoretically, but that you could have a very different number of units on a 50-acre site while taking up the exact same area. The per unit is saying that if you had 200 units on 50 acres, but now you're proposing 500, the 10% base open space is not equitable anymore. So you're going to want to spread that out and increase the requirement so that each resident has more open space to utilize. And so that's why you have the per unit when that is the case. Also requiring minimum 60 square feet of private open space per unit, and that's again just to ensure that maybe you don't want to go to the park, you have a little patio to sit on. Part of the design standards are requiring the above. These 8 things are just basics. There's more in there, but these are just highlights, requiring accent, colors and materials, windows that provide relief and extra detail, requiring a minimum of 3 colors along a street-facing facade, providing variations in the roof profile so you don't just have the same roof line for 200 feet and it just looks like a Cracker Jack box. It's things like that that help create the visual interest, provide more beautiful buildings whether you're walking or driving by. And with that, we will stand for any final questions that you guys may have.
Counselor Stoddard?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Joe, on the impact fees for schools, other than the bonds, is there any bullet points that you can send me that might help me out with my legislative meeting tomorrow afternoon, or is that primarily what it is?
I'm sure Robin and I could maybe come up with a
Okay,
couple
just
things that
short
we'd want
bullet
to
points.
highlight.
I don't want you to go into detail, but that would help me. On the affordable housing, so we're going to use the Fed numbers, right? If somebody came in and said, okay, Caldwell, how much affordable housing do you have? We can answer that question based on these new parameters, or can we answer that question?
There's
Based on
certain,
Fed numbers, not our,
well, there's certain parameters, and well, I guess there's 2 things to that. One, the density bonus is not based off of current units, so to speak. It's based off of the median income, and we're saying that we want. They have the reason why they use names like extremely low or moderately low income is because those fluctuate, right? The median income changes. And so we're using those terms versus specific percentages of income to make sure that we're getting a variety of housing. But those are based on the Fed, yes, absolutely. But saying, also going through the HUD to say how many we have overall is something that we do too, but that's not part of the density bonus program.
because we still get complaints, as you know, that we don't have enough affordable housing.
Right.
But what's that based on? See, they can never answer that.
Well, in the comp plan, thankfully, they did research into that and the existing
I mean, the
conditions
complainers
report.
still can't answer
Yeah,
that.
well,
You know,
that's
it's
a-
all over the board, so you know that. Relative to the shrubs and the grasses on our new specs, do we have a list that we give developers that you can use these shrubs that are drought resistant or grasses or anything, or do we have that?
Oh, not for the shrubs and the grasses, but for the trees, yes. All of the nurseries know that the entire valley uses the Treasure Valley Tree Selection Guide, and that is an extremely useful tool. There is not a universal tool for shrubs. However, we understand there's certain ones that work here and certain ones that don't. We see a lot of common ones, so
Okay.
that's up to the planners to work with the developers as they come in. There's really going to be more about what the sizes are, and then a quick Google search, you could find out pretty quick whether they use a lot of water or don't.
Okay. And lastly, this is before you came, but the Union Creek Steakhouse sign, it's been a complaint for a long time, but no matter what, he's grandfathered in. I mean, he doesn't need to change it, right?
Unless he changes it, and then, like, you're grandfathered in until you ask to do something else, and then you need to comply with the new code.
Okay, so what about previous specs on signs? Would he have to follow that or not? Because like I say, it's been around, or been complained about ever since I've been on the council back in 2016, so I was just curious about it.
Typically, if he would want to expand it and make some major changes, especially because of where it's located, and it's in that design review, he'd probably have to go through some process, and we would very likely, again, I don't know the specifics of it, but very likely require him to comply with the new code, not the old.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, yes, Counselor Allgood, I apologize, I forgot about you out there.
Yeah, I have a few questions, if take a minute. Joe, on the multifamily, are they required to put in any amenities at all?
Counselor Allgood, yes, sir. The new code does require minimum number of amenities based upon the number of units.
Okay. And then second question, ADUs, are they required to have full utilities and get an occupancy permit?
Yes, sir. They're a structure, so they will have a certificate of occupancy, yes.
And full utilities, right? You can't reside in one without a bathroom?
Right, yeah, they have to have full living and sanitary facilities. They may not have their own main, so to speak, but they could be connected, or I should say, they may not have their own meter. The building and
Yeah.
engineering and planning department have worked together to say that in some cases they will have their own meter, in other cases they'll be connected to the main home meter. But yes, they have to have facilities.
Okay, and then anything in chapter 10 that we're changing, does it change how we determine property lines and setbacks on existing homes?
Yes, sir. All of the dimensional standards and any of
I
those.
lost you, Joe. Can you say that again, please?
Counselor Allgood, can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear us? He lost us.
Did we lose him?
Yeah,
So there, oh, there you are.
Can you hear us?
yeah, it went out. Could you repeat that, please, Joe?
No worries. Short answer is yes. All of the changes to the dimensional standards in each of the zoning districts would affect current homes, both where the setbacks are measured from, as well as what those setbacks are. Now, the caveat to that is they're also quote-unquote grandfathered in, but if they were to do any addition, they would have to comply with the new dimensional standards.
And if I understand it right, the new dimensional standards are where we measure from on determining a setback? Is that part of it?
It's part of it, yes. Current code says typically from the back of sidewalk. We're changing that to property line. And then we're increasing the garage setback, but then reducing the side setbacks as general across. That'd be for residential. There's other changes to the commercial and industrial standards that are overall a increase in setbacks.
Okay, and then one last thing, I am still struggling with the density program part. Everything else I'm kind of on board with, so I don't know how the rest of the council feels, but that's a piece that I have not bought off on. I'm just, I don't know, as it comes forward, I'll probably want to do some more work on that.
Understood, and we appreciate that feedback and implore you to meet with us. We can go line by line, word by word, however you want to do it, with any council member for that matter, to help you gain a better understanding of what's being proposed, what would be required, et cetera, and that way you guys can be more comfortable with it. And if you're not on board, then you're also not on board.
Hey, thank you, Joe. I appreciate it very much.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Counselor Allgood. Appreciate that. And I don't see any green lights in the room here, so I think that concludes that. So thank you again for all of your hard work, for the entire staff and everything you did, and we appreciate you getting it in under an hour. Well done, with 1 minute and 51 seconds to spare. So excellent. So we will take a little break, and then we'll be back just after 6 o'clock to begin our regularly scheduled meeting. Thank you again.
Council.